Today I'm going to talk about one of the most powerful weapons of World War II, Japanese invasion money. I'd like to provide a brief introduction to Jim notes, share some interesting stories I've uncovered, go over some of the rare and unusual notes, and give you some tips for collecting. Hopefully you'll go away with a broader knowledge of the subject and a sparked interest in collecting or dealing in Jim for yourself. In the early 1940s, Japan headed the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere to free Asia from colonial powers and Asia for Asiatics. They convinced a number of countries that they would be well suited to an alliance with Japan, and with little resistance, Japanese imperial forces went on to invade these countries and enforce their newly created currency. Jim in World War II was issued in Burma, the Dutch East Indies, Philippines, Malaya and Oceania, which included some Australian territories. Burmese notes generally carry the letter B and are mainly in the denominations of cents and rupees. A few of the notes in this series carry an image of the Ananda Temple. I think this was a clever way to convince the local Burmese that Japan was on their side, as it showed that they respected and were sensitive to their traditions, religion and sacred sites. Initially, the Japanese troops were welcomed by the Burmese people and were assisted by the Burmese Independence Army and the Indian National Army, which greatly progressed Japan's grand plans of domination. An interesting note in the Burmese series is the 10 rupees note. Here you can see a depiction of the Ananda Temple on the front. This note was counterfeited by both American and British forces. There are slight differences between the notes, as you can see in the photo. The counterfeit notes are worth possibly 4 to 5 times more than the originals. The bane of banknote collectors is counterfeiting. This is true to some extent with gem collectors, but as the diagram depicts, a gem collection can stretch further than just the original Japanese notes. There are certainly many desirable counterfeits, replicas, fantasy and propaganda notes that are rarer and command a higher price than the Japanese originals. Worthy additions to any gem collection are the US propaganda notes, produced in Burmese and Kachin. The front of both displays a copy of the 5 rupees note. The back, in local languages, advise that the Japanese paper money is worthless and not to trust the Japanese. The Dutch East Indies or Netherland Indies notes are generally identified by an S prefix and are in the denominations of cents, guldens and rupiah. These are the most beautiful of all gem notes. As with the Burmese series, these designs were carefully planned to appeal to the local sensitivities. Ancient kings, statues, religious and cultural figures are all represented here. Arjuna, a character from a traditional Javanese shadow puppet show, is featured on the back of the 100 rupiah notes, as well as on the very rare 1, 5 and 10 cent coins. Although the mintage was high for these tin and aluminium coins, most were either lost at sea or returned to Japan and melted down. Authentic coins can be found through dealers in Japan, but be very wary of high-priced, slabbed coins from China. Here is a letter from the Commonwealth Bank archives relating to the Australian government producing counterfeit gem notes for use in the Netherland Indies. This letter is a request from the government of the Netherland Indies asking the Australian government to supply a total of 60,000 counterfeit Japanese notes. Only a few months after this was another letter stating that they had almost run out of their previous order and requested a second order for an even larger quantity. This gives you an idea of the vast number of counterfeits produced at the time. I have read that counterfeit notes were found on captured Japanese soldiers, which showed that the copies were so good the Japanese couldn't even tell the difference. The Malayan series, generally identified by the letter M, are in the denominations of cents and dollars. This series possibly has the most number of counterfeits and fantasy notes of all. If this Malay $1,000 note had a block letter M in red with sloping sides, it would be worth about $10. But as shown here, with the block letter being a rare black M with straight sides, the note is worth possibly $500 to $700. I've only come across a couple of examples of this note in the past few years, but certainly one to look out for. The Philippine series is denoted by the letter P and is made up of centavos and pesos. After the Japanese surrender, most of the JIM notes were destroyed, thrown away and burned. This photo shows the scale of just how many crates of notes were destroyed at the time. There were, however, many Filipinos still holding vast quantities of the worthless JIM that they could not exchange for legal tender. In 1953, the Japanese War Notes Claimants Association of the Philippines, JAPWANAP, was formed in an attempt to put pressure on governments to recognise and exchange their money. One of the Filipinos' claims was that the US was responsible for devaluing JIM notes by flooding the market with their counterfeits. The issue of official counterfeiting was classified information at the time, and it was not until years later that evidence of their counterfeiting came to light. People could join the JAPWANAP Association and hand over their notes in exchange for a certificate. This, of course, came at a cost for storage, insurance and registration. The notes were then stamped with one of a number of designs, such as the ones shown in the photo. I actually had this stamp made to show just how easy it is to replicate the old overstamps. This one won't add value to an authentic note, but other designs could certainly add $40 to the value of a cheap and common note. The JAPWANAP held millions in pesos and were never successful in claiming a return on the money. It is assumed that most of the notes have now been on-sold to collectors. Oceania notes are the smallest series, have an O block letter, and are in the denominations of shillings and pounds. There is debate that Japan never planned to invade Australia, but then again it wasn't uncommon for Japan to attack a country before declaring war against them. It gave them an edge, and who were they to answer to at the time? The Oceania JIM notes that Australian troops found on captured Japanese soldiers were all the proof Australia needed to be convinced that they were earmarked for an invasion. That, and the fact that Japan had already launched over 100 attacks on Australian soil. The items shown here, minus the poster, were actually found on a dead Japanese soldier in New Guinea. The 1/4 shilling note was documented about 35 years ago. It is a composite fake, made up from a couple of different notes. It is from England and caused quite a stir when they started circulating. They are very rare, and although I'd like to say are worthless, most collectors would like one for their own collection. When word spread of soldiers returning to Australia with Japanese invasion notes in the same denominations and size as Australian notes at the time, they quickly became collector's items and souvenirs. A few industrious printers in Brisbane began printing replica notes. Some of the notes carried the word replica on the back and some didn't. This slide shows one of the letters from the Reserve Bank archives. The authorities found replica notes being sold in shops in Brisbane and Toowoomba and really didn't know whether their activities were illegal. They set up an official inquiry to track down the printers responsible, but in the end it would seem that they weren't breaking any laws. Here is one of the notes that has the word replica printed on the back. These notes are now very valuable and rarely seen in good condition due to the poor paper quality. Like a lot of the counterfeit Jim notes from the 1940s, they have their own unique story, and that's where their value lies. With the help of the MacArthur Museum in Brisbane, I managed to track down a printery that is still operating today under the name of Victory Press. They were responsible for printing counterfeit Jim money in World War II, under the direction of General Douglas MacArthur himself. I spoke to the current owner and he told me how his grandfather had owned the printery in World War II and were located around the corner from MacArthur's headquarters. On a number of occasions, MacArthur and his troops took over the printery at gunpoint and his grandfather had to work under the security of armed guards producing counterfeit Jim notes. The printery still had some bundles of leftover notes up until the early 1970s, when a major flood hit Brisbane and destroyed their precious relics. The Japanese also issued invasion notes in China. In August last year, the BBC reported that a group of elderly Chinese, including Lam Yinbun, shown here, were demanding compensation from the Japanese for the military yen that they had held on to for over 70 years. The Reparation Association of Hong Kong represented about 3,500 families who owned about 540 million in military yen with a face value of approximately 6 million Australian dollars. Like Mr. Yinbun and the families in Hong Kong, I wonder if there were others holding hordes of Jim notes in the hope that one day they will be able to swap them for legal tender. As I've mentioned, there are a lot of counterfeit Jim notes. A majority of the original notes have security features. Shown here is the quarterfoil design used as a patterned watermark throughout Japanese invasion money, including all Oceania series. Sometimes the watermark pattern is not instantly visible, but this does not dismiss the authenticity of the note, as it may be present but just very faint. You may have heard the term mihon when referring to specimen notes. Mihon refers to the Japanese characters shown here and translates as specimen in English. The other feature on some notes is the beautiful silk thread paper. I've tried to enlarge it here to show you. If you look at the paper through a loupe, you'll be able to see both royal and bright red silk threads woven into the paper. There is certainly a growing market in the world for Japanese invasion money, and recent sales and auction results back this up. The latest Noble auction had 2 mihon, and the bidding was fierce. The Oceania 1 shilling specimen, shown here, was almost uncirculated, but had horizontal brown glue lines, or striation marks on the back, from being stored in a photo album, and that sold for approximately 560 Australian dollars. And the Oceania £1 specimen, shown here, sold for over $640. A Spink auction in London sold a few rare Jim notes with a very rare 100 peso note for the equivalent of over 8,000 Australian dollars. There was debate after the auction by the world's leading experts on the IBNS forum of the authenticity of this note, and I agree that it's possible that this note is a counterfeit. Either way, it shows the popularity and solid investment market for Jim notes in the world. Japanese invasion money is a fascinating and relatively inexpensive item to start collecting. If I've sparked your interest, I would encourage you to purchase a copy of my book, The Collector's Guide to Japanese Invasion Money from World War II. Go to JapaneseInvasionMoney.com for more information and to purchase online.